These are the officers found guilty yesterday on February 12th in a federal district court in Baltimore City, Maryland. Hey, good morning, guys. This is Mike McCormick with Advanced Criminology here in Owings Mills, Maryland. And today is February 13th, 2018. As you guys well know, I've been following and chasing down this story with the two remaining officers from the Gun Trace Task Force here in Baltimore City. As you know, I was in court yesterday, February 12th, 2018. I got downtown to the courthouse probably around 10 o'clock yesterday morning, and then I stayed really all day long till 6 p.m. Now, just to give you guys an idea of what transpired, in between what you don't hear and don't see, yesterday around 3 o'clock, the jury came back and they were undecided on one count. And that count had to do with the jury really not understanding the charge of carrying a firearm. The use of a firearm to commit a felony is what they had a problem with trying to reconcile back in deliberations. And so oftentimes, particularly a count like that, which is a mandatory sentence, by the way. And if you guys didn't know what a mandatory sentence is it means this. It means that if that charge carries 20 years, you have to do 20 years before you can even start any other part of your sentencing. As you well know, each officer was charged with racketeering, robbery, and overtime fraud. Each of those charges carries 20 years. Okay? So you're looking at 20 years for each charge, and those charges, in terms of officers doing the sentencing, would not be able to start that sentence until they finish the first 20 years on the use of a felony, use of a handgun to commit a felony. Nobody makes out when they go to prison, so to speak. But in terms of sentencing, in terms of having to do hard time, these officers, in a sense, made out, because I will tell you that mandatory handgun violation is a very serious federal charge. It's a very serious state charge. In most of the states that you guys live in, there are many mandatory sentences dealing with firearms in this day and age. And anytime you're sentenced to a firearm case, you will have to serve that time before you serve any other additional time that you may get in a particular trial. And so in that sense, at least there's the officers can at least have some hope of freedom one day. So right now, yesterday, I had the opportunity to meet with a whole bunch of people downtown the federal courthouse. I met with attorneys, I met with reporters, spent pretty much all day talking with a couple of investigative reporters, learned some other things about this particular case. And what hasn't been explained to you guys, and it's probably been my fault, is that there's a backdrop to this particular case. Now, most people would think that this case started with internal investigation. Well, it didn't. It actually started with an investigation that was going on in Harford County, Maryland, in reference to a heroin overdose of a young lady. Now, let me give you another backdrop. As you know, opioid addiction is a huge thing in this particular country right now. A lot of people are under fire now, for particularly the medical profession, for issuing out opioids unchecked by a lot of local distributors, and has caused an opioid epidemic in this particular country. Now, Harford County is no different, and they're affected just like the average county around the United States. So their officers were doing an investigation in reference to a young lady's death, as I said before, and it turned out that that investigation led them to Baltimore City as where the origins of this particular heroin that was being distributed in Harford County were coming from. And so that took the agents from Harford County into the city to investigate why and where were these drugs coming from. Further investigation on a wiretap that was being conducted revealed that Officer Gondo, as you know, this officer's name comes up in many, many things. I'm actually doing a separate video dealing with some of Officer Gondo's past criminal experiences prior to getting on the police department. That will be forthcoming probably today or tomorrow. Now, Officer Gondo was very pivotal in this whole gun task force case because his name comes up in a wiretap from Harford County, and the Harford County detectives continue on with their investigation, and they subsequently are able to find out more information regarding Gondo's participation in the distribution of heroin to Harford County. This is a police officer now. Furthermore, what I did not, and what I learned yesterday, was that during the riots of 2015 here in Baltimore, there were a lot of pharmacies that were looted. And as a result of those pharmacies being looted, there were tons and tons of pills that were taken from those pharmacies. What we did not know, and what came forward since I've been doing this investigation, was that at least 2 trash bags full of OxyContin and other opioid addictive controlled dangerous substances were actually confiscated and taken by the police department, meaning that these officers actually were involved in the theft of those drugs from local pharmacies. And they were buying drugs from those individuals who were looting those particular pharmacies. That's how the large quantity of distribution of opioids got started out in Harford County as well as in the city. The hospitals and local clinics were seeing an influx of patients coming to their areas based upon the distribution of the narcotics to the individuals. So once that was determined, that's when, again, a separate investigation was launched too by some of the local hospitals, letting the local law enforcement know that they were seeing tons and tons of patients coming to the emergency rooms for overdosing. That's how this whole thing is just mind-boggling, but it makes sense, and sometimes it doesn't make sense. So I just wanted to give you the backdrop as to why and how this investigation got started. Now, give you more information. Again, yesterday around 3 o'clock, as I was saying before, I didn't really go into more detail about it. The jury couldn't decide about the handgun, the commission of a felony. And they came out and they asked the judge, could you give us more information? The judge said, no, I can't give you any more information than what is in the jury instructions. Okay, they went back, deliberated for a couple more hours. They came back at 5:30 in the afternoon yesterday on the 12th and decided guilty on all counts except for the handgun in the use of a commission of a felony. I guess it's my understanding that oftentimes that charge, because these officers are allowed to carry weapons, it's probably a hard charge to get a conviction on, because there would have to be testimony from the victims that the officers came in the house and took their guns and actually pointed them at them. I don't think the testimony was that. It was misunderstood, I think, by the jury. I think that there was enough information in the particular charge as it is read, as it was in the jury instructions, that to warrant the conviction for that particular charge. The jury just didn't understand the charge, I believe. And so therefore they couldn't find both of the officers guilty on that particular charge. So that was very interesting in and of itself. A lot of people in the courtroom yesterday. In the gallery, it's probably like 100 people, easy, 125 people that sat to observe this particular trial. It's interesting, when the officers first came through the door from in the back room where they were at before the trial started, they were already they weren't handcuffed when they came through the door. However, when the final verdict was read and the judge ruled that in fact the jury's guilty verdict was in fact a final verdict in this case, the officers were immediately handcuffed in the courtroom, and the families who were there started to cry and, were very visually upset. There was one individual who was a victim, this young man. I met him out in the courtroom in the hallway, and he was crying in the courtroom. And his story is a difficult story. This is a gentleman who, he's had some brushes with the law in the past, and the officers in this particular case kept harassing his family all the time, week in and week out. They were coming to his house trying to find narcotics, didn't have warrants in many cases, harassed his wife and his kids, to the point that he had to move from one part of Baltimore City to another to get away from these officers. And he explained his story that, he had a couple paychecks with a job he just started, and the officers took his money. They confiscated all of his paperwork, And it was proven that, a lot of the money that he made was in fact from working. And so, his family just had to relocate because they couldn't handle it anymore. So it was a very sad story. And so I just wanted to bring that out and explain to you, how corruption can affect people for a long term. And this is going to be a long-term effect on his family. Okay, moving on. Let's see. Pardon me. So I wanted to keep this video short. Lots of times when I can't get and produce these videos as quick as I would like to, because there's so many moving parts to production of a video, as well as putting the time in to make sure I can do something worth quality to put on my channel. So I'll take my time. Lots of times if I have a lot of information, I can put a lot of stuff out. And I just wanted to let you guys know that when you don't see a video from me 2 or 3 days in a row, it's because I'm doing some investigative work, and I really want to give you some quality stuff. You have a lot of questions that you answer in the comments section, and I always want to get back to you. But let me follow up with this. As I said before, in reference to the Gondo case, very, very powerful issue that I'll be discussing, and it deals with several homicides that happened within blocks of where Detective Gondo was living. 2005 and in 2006. As you all know, in December of 2006, if you didn't know, Officer Gondo was shot 2 months after he had gotten out of the police academy. So the suspicion is, based upon his own testimony, that he was involved in criminal activity prior to getting on the police department, and he also helped basically kill someone before. So what we're going to do, and we've made note of that to some investigative reporters around the city, that we intend to look at that. That's a very serious charge, a very serious admission, if you will, by someone who's sworn to serve and protect, that they were involved in criminal activity to the extent that they committed murder prior to getting on the police department, which again I criticize the Human Resource Department for Baltimore City as not doing a thorough background check as to how this guy was able to move through the process, the application process, without this being a red flag somewhere along the line of his involvement in gang activity prior to getting employed by the Baltimore Police Department, and then the many red flags along the way in his 13-year career. So yeah, we'll be talking about that. I'll be giving you some diagrams just to kind of outlay, exactly, what we believe his involvement to the extent was. So with that, I want to thank you guys once again for tuning in to Advanced Criminology. I look forward to your comments in the comments section. Please share our videos and make sure if you haven't subscribed yet that you do. Thanks a lot.